Hello everybody, my name is Mr. Anomalous and welcome back. I got a little something for all you gamers out there, so this is SCP-1633, otherwise known as the most dangerous video game. SCP-1633 is a computer game created by the now defunct independent game studio blank blank. The copy in Foundation possession is a beta version of the game. The core gameplay is relatively complete, but there are numerous incomplete aspects. Certain art assets are missing, there are various graphical issues, the music is either missing or just placeholder music, and so forth. See document SCP-1633-BV-1 for a list of known bugs and missing elements. As this version of the game was completed 2 days before the Foundation raided the blank blank offices on an unknown date in the 2010s, it is presumed this is the most complete version of the game in existence. The source of the anomalous properties of the game, as well as major selling points in the game's pre-release advertising, are its so-called tactical heuristic algorithms. After a player saves their game and quits, a background process will begin running on the player's computer. This process, while consuming a large portion of the computer's resources, is not in itself harmful to the functioning of the computer and can be forcefully closed at any time. This will prevent the creation of a .ptd file. When the process is complete, either a new file is created in the same folder as the player's saved game with the file extension ptd, or a pre-existing ptd file is updated. According to supporting documentation, file extension stands for Player Tactical Data. When a player loads an existing save game with an associated .ptd file, enemies in the game will be more intelligent and effective, with the increase approximately proportionate to the total amount of hours spent playing. If a player attempts to load a saved game created by a different player, the game will pause after several minutes and prompt the player to load their own file or start a new game, rather than use someone else's. This is not thought to be an anomalous effect, rather the game's pattern recognition capabilities are such that even small differences in playstyle will be interpreted as a player attempting to use a different saved game. Initially, this will result in a more challenging gaming experience, with the enemies adapting to a player's preferred weapon strategies and overall player style. However, given enough time, enemies will become aware of the existence of the player and begin to attack him or her rather than the characters in the game. Typical progression is as follows. Total time, 0 to 2 hours. Intelligence. Enemies lack even basic strategic intelligence and will charge at the player or characters regardless of weapon equipped, environment, the presence of cover, etc. Total time, 2 to 5 hours. Intelligence. Enemies will begin adapting their tactics to their environments and the weapons they carry. For example, enemies with short-range weapons will attempt to move closer to the player characters before attacking, and in engagements at long range, they will seek cover. At this stage, enemies are roughly equal in skill to an untrained civilian. Total time, 5 to 8 hours. Intelligence. Enemies will begin to counter an individual's player's preferred strategies. For example, they will attack a player who uses long-range weaponry from cover with grenades or splash damage weapons to force them out into the open. They will use environmental features offensively and defensively. For instance, laying traps at choke points or setting up ambushes in kill box zones. At this stage, enemies are roughly equal in skill to a trained human soldier. Total time, 8 to 12 hours. Intelligence. Enemies will begin using tactics which affect the player instead of the characters. At some point, enemies seem to become aware that player characters are being controlled by an outside intelligence and adjust their strategies accordingly. Rather than attacking the player characters, enemies may instead position themselves to block the player's view. Enemies have been seen acting in a glitched manner, repeatedly walking to walls, performing the same actions again and again, freezing in place, waiting until the player dismisses them as a threat, then attacking. In one play session, enemies used multiple day flash spells, a spell which causes a bright, blinding flash of light in every engagement, varying the pattern and timing of each one. Eventually, they developed a strobing pattern which was highly disorienting to the player and ultimately caused her to suffer a grand mal seizure. Total time, 12 plus hours. Intelligence. Enemies begin attacking the player psychologically. Specific modes of attack have varied wildly as the game tailors its attacks to each player's psychological makeup. Facing a player who micromanages his characters with a fine degree of control, enemies use attacks which did little or no damage because the players become dazed, a state which temporarily disrupts player control. However, rather than attack the dazed characters, enemies simply surrounded them in a crowd, continuously using daze attacks to prevent the player from doing anything. The subsequent near-total loss of control had a noticeable effect on the player's ability to focus. In another example, enemies kidnapped one of the player characters and quickly dragged them off screen. Later in the level, the player discovered a corpse of the character on a makeshift altar being continuously attacked by a group of enemies. This had no further effect, apart from a continual blood splatter graphic being applied to the room's floor and walls, but visually disturbed the player. No major improvements in intelligence have been noted beyond 12 hours. It is theorized this represents the upper level of ability for the game's enemies, unless they are directed by a sentient entity. See document 1633-DX-12 for further information. Game information. SCP-1633 is a third-person squad-based action RPG, played using a mouse and keyboard. The player characters are visible on the screen, with the player seeing the game from an elevated perspective. The player controls a squad of 4 characters with direct control over one character at a time, and a command menu to control the other 3. Development notes indicate that the game was intended to have a cooperative mode in which up to 4 players would each control one of the 4 squad members. This feature is not present in the build held by the Foundation. Each character has a different specialty. The marksman uses long-range weapons, the alchemist has access to potions and chemicals with various effects, the rogue can move stealthily and assassinate enemies, and the thug has greater health than the other characters and does more melee damage. Experience gained from killing enemies and completing objectives can be used to upgrade various skills and attributes of the characters. The game is set in a steampunk world populated by various fantasy races: humans, dwarves, orcs, goblins, etc. Steam-powered and clockwork technology exists alongside magic. Urban areas are primarily modeled after Victorian-era London. The player characters are a band of criminals who have been recruited by the Archduke of Birdwick to investigate a theft. However, over the course of the game, they discovered that an ancient godlike entity called Krasanar is attempting to escape from a millennia of imprisonment and devour the world. Testing logs. Test number 1. Subject Junior Researcher Ross. Notes. Ross was an avid and experienced video game player. His eagerness to test the SCP, which caused him to break protocol and skip D-class testing, has been noted on his record. Observations. After 47 minutes of regular gameplay, Ross has begun attempting to discover glitches or exploits in the game's engine in order to complete the game more quickly. He found several, including a method of moving his character 33% faster than normal, and a way to use a skill multiple times in a row without waiting through a cooldown period. Ross ended his first gameplay session after 2 hours 12 minutes, partway through Act 1. On starting his game up the next day, Ross immediately noticed the improvement in the enemy intelligence. His notes indicate that enemies were using their weapons more effectively and that they were attacking him in groups with mixed attack capabilities. He played for 1 hour and 33 minutes, saving the game at the end of Act 1. During the third gameplay session, enemies began using glitches in the game engine to attack Ross's characters. Some of these were exploits that had been previously discovered and used by Ross. Others were discovered independently. Ross was surprised by this, but continued playing for a further 2 hours and 50 minutes. Ross's fourth and final play session ended after 7 minutes. He began by chasing a group of enemies into an area he had previously visited. Upon entering a building, 2 enemies dropped a prepared load of crates on characters in such a way as to drop them beneath the game world. In this area, the game's physics were slightly different, allowing a group of waiting enemies to float Ross's characters into an infinite empty space. After several minutes attempting to regain control, Ross quit the game in frustration. Test number 2. Subject D22930. Notes: D22930 has extreme anger management issues and was placed into the D-class program following the murder of his girlfriend. Observation: D22930's progress through the game was slow and largely unremarkable, fitting the standard pattern closely. He played for a total of 13 hours 44 minutes with 4 breaks to save and reload the game. Upon loading his game for a 5th time, D22930 found that enemies were no longer attacking his characters. Large groups of enemies would rush towards the characters, drop their weapons, and put themselves in postures of surrender, hands in the air, kneeling, etc. D22930 killed these enemies as he has done previously, until the groups grew so numerous that he was spending several minutes to move an equivalent of 10 feet. He became progressively more enraged that enemies were not, quote, playing fair, unquote, and tried running through the groups using the Bull Rush skill, a non-lethal skill used by the thug to rush forward, pushing enemies aside in that way. Individual enemies began attacking his characters, always from an angle such that he could not identify the attacker in the crowd. He became increasingly frustrated and attempted to break the keyboard, at which point the entire group became hostile and killed his characters en masse without weapons. Test number 14. Subject: Agent Blank. Note: Agent Blank, before joining the Foundation, was a member of the Blank military and eventually the Blank Special Forces. She thus has extensive real-world experience with small unit tactics. Observations: After a brief period to acquaint herself with the controls, Agent Blank proved quite capable with the game, until reaching the end of Act 1 session of 4 hours and 19 minutes. Upon saving and restarting, the enemies had begun using effective countermeasures to her tactics, including attempting to blend into groups of non-hostile NPCs, placing mines and other traps in major roads, and sniping from multiple elevated positions. Possibility of using SCP-1633 as means of developing counter-tactics to specific attack modes have been proposed. Being a gamer myself, I'm really interested in getting this and going through it. I think it'd be a really interesting experience. To go through. And I really wonder what other games would be like if this player tactical data existed within them. So that's been SCP-1633. Thank you all for listening.